If you ever took a drama class, I suppose if you're taking one right now, you likely did that exercise where you were given a line from a script and your teacher invited you to wonder about how many different ways you could deliver that line. So you could deliver it with, you could shout it, or you could whisper it, or you could say it in a sing-song voice. You could say the line while running across the stage or while standing as still as possible. And depending on what choice you made, the line, the words were the same every time, meant something different. There's a super fun video you can find on YouTube of famous English actors, all of whom have played Hamlet, all of whom are making their own interpretation of Hamlet's famous question, to be or not to be. And the one actor will punch to, and another will punch but, and another will pause in the middle of to be or not to be, and all of them insist that their interpretation is the correct one. I've been thinking about that exercise today and this week, reflecting on Jesus and Peter. So Jesus is with his friends, he's with his disciples, and he says to them, "What awaits me is the cross. I am going to be apprehended by the religious authorities, by empire. I'm going to be murdered in the worst way possible. That's what my future looks like." And Peter does what I would probably do if one of my friends were talking like this. Peter takes Jesus aside and says, "Stop it. Stop talking that way. Like this is destructive and dangerous. This is not a way to talk." And Jesus does not return the favor of speaking to Peter in private. He turns to his disciples and says one of the most shocking lines in Scripture, "Get behind me, Satan." My question for us this morning is if you were the director of a passion play, one that started a little earlier than typical passion plays, so one that starts maybe with this very scene, with Jesus and Peter and their friends on the road to Jerusalem, and you had your lead actor, your Jesus on stage, how would you direct that actor to say these words? "Get behind me, Satan"? I have a few wonderings. Maybe you've got your own. A first possible answer, and maybe this is the most obvious interpretation, is to say these words with anger. "Get behind me, Satan." There's a fury here, a shaking rage in Jesus' voice that is maybe driven because there is a genuine temptation that Peter is offering to him. In this reading, this scene is a sort of prefiguration of Gethsemane. So in the garden, just before Judas comes to betray him, just before the soldiers come, Jesus is waiting, and he's in this place of agony. He's agonizing so deeply that he is sweating blood. He asks his friends to wait with him, to stay up with him, and they can't do it. They keep falling asleep. And he prays to the Father and says, "Let this cup pass from me. I don't want to have to do this. If there's any way that I don't have to go to the cross, I want to not go to the cross." But then he adds, "But not what I want, but what you want. Let your will be done." It is this, Jesus knows somehow with this terrible clarity that he must go to the cross. It's something he talks about throughout his ministry, and it's not something he wants. It is this impossibly difficult thing that he has said yes to, always asking the Father if it might be taken from him. And having made this really difficult decision. I don't know if you've ever made a really difficult decision. Sometimes you announce it out loud, and you are saying the decision in part to let your friends know that you've made the decision, but also because in saying it out loud, you're making it more real for yourself. I've decided to do this thing. I've decided to stop doing this thing. And having made that announcement, having made the difficult leap, it's not always helpful when your friends say to you, why don't you just not do that? That thing you don't want to do, why don't you not do that? We use the language, we use the word Satan, and in popular culture, picture a guy in a red suit with the pitchfork in the tail, right? In Scripture, Satan is something more like an office or a gig. This is particularly apparent in the book of Job, and it's a job that means tempter. In Job, the tempter, who's kind of part of God's retinue in some weird way. There's a job you could apply for in Indeed, right? I'd like to be the tempter. The tempter goes to God and sets this bargain. And so Jesus is saying something like, "Stop it, you tempter. Like this thing you're offering me is what I want more than anything, and I mustn't say yes to it." Like, of course he is furious, even if he knows that Peter is speaking in love. And that brings us to another possible reading. What if you were to tell the actor playing Jesus that he should speak not with anger, but rather with disappointment? Get behind me, Satan. I don't know how many of you have a elder in your life, someone who you respect. Maybe they're gone now, and you said that thing of them. It was harder when they were disappointed than when they were angry. This is a thing we often say about our parents, right? And I wonder if that is what Peter is feeling in this moment. Like, actually, in this reading, he wishes Jesus were yelling because it would be easier than to see the disappointment in his eyes. Ron Rolheiser, the wonderful contemporary theologian, wrote recently about Thomas Aquinas and said that for Aquinas, I guess Aquinas was sitting with a question. Someone had asked him, like, is this given behavior a sin? I don't know, you can plug in whatever example you want. And Aquinas came back and said, the answer to that question is actually usually it depends. There probably are things that are always sins, that are always immoral, but often the answer is it depends on the circumstance and it depends on the people involved or the person involved. So to choose a very famous example, most folks hold that a very poor person stealing bread to feed their family, most folks say that's not a sinful thing to do. That is ethically understandable. It doesn't follow that it's okay for me to take up a shoplifting habit. And similarly, there are certain emergency situations where it's okay to restrain another person, even though it's not generally okay to do that. I've told many of you that several years ago, Phoebe and I were leaving the Hollywood Theater, and there was a guy on the street just sort of throwing punches at strangers. And so several bystanders and I laid on top of him until the police could come. It was okay in that circumstance. It would be sinful for me to go around lying on strangers on the street. Like, that's not a thing that it would be okay for me to do. Aquinas himself gives the very folksy example, the everyday example, and says it's sinful to withhold a compliment from someone who deserves it. If someone really deserves praise, you shouldn't hold back this thing. And Aquinas says that compliment might be the food they need. But then he adds, this withholding is only sinful for a spiritually and emotionally mature person. For someone who's a child who doesn't know any better, for someone who's like deep into their own crisis and can't see past their own grief and pain in that moment, for someone who's merely clueless, it's not a sin for that person. We can't expect them to do any better. You have to know that you ought to be offering a compliment, that you ought to be offering praise, for it to be a mistake, for it to be a sin not to offer it. And in this reading of Jesus is disappointed, Jesus wouldn't be disappointed if a member of the crowd, if Jesus said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and the state is going to murder me, Jesus wouldn't be disappointed if a member of the crowd said, stop talking like that, that's nuts. But he is disappointed in Peter because Peter should know better. Peter has been with him. He is, we heard just a few weeks ago, Peter being among the first disciples who say yes to Jesus' call. Along with John and James, he leaves the boats and follows Jesus immediately. Peter's just returned from the transfiguration, from this impossible experience, this holy experience of going up the mountain with John and James, and they're seeing Jesus shining and seeing Jesus speaking to Elijah and to Moses and hearing the voice that says, this is my son, the beloved in whom I am well pleased. Peter has seen that the kingdom is inbreaking in Jesus. He is seeing that something extraordinary and holy is happening in Jesus, and yet in this moment he reveals that he doesn't understand. And so Jesus is disappointed. Get behind me. And that leads me to a third possibility. What if you were to say to your actor, Jesus is neither angry nor disappointed, but rather try saying this line as, I guess I have some explaining I need to do. Okay, get behind me, Satan. Peter, in common with the rest of Jesus' disciples, most of them, all of them, maybe in common with you and me, I don't know, is looking for a different Messiah than the one who has shown up. He is looking for a Messiah that looks like the Messiahs of the world. So the kings of the world, the Messiahs of the world, what do we know about them? They're about status. It is, they land in helicopters and you bow before them. They solve their problems with violence. You may not actually want to bow before them, but you will, because there's going to be hell to pay if you do not. When they enter into Jerusalem, it is on a war horse. And if there are people cheering for them, it's because they're ordered to be there. They're afraid not to be. And that's not what Jesus' kingdom looks like at all. Jesus persistently rejects violence. His followers offer it to him. John and James say, should we call down fire on these people who've rejected us? And Jesus says, no, that's not how the kingdom works. In Gethsemane, one of the disciples pulls out a sword. Jesus says, put it away. That is not how the kingdom works. None of the resurrection appearances feature Jesus taking revenge on the people who have hurt him. You'd swear, right? There should be at least one resurrection appearance in which Jesus is throwing centurions out of windows. That is how we would expect the story to end, and it doesn't end that way. And when Jesus enters Jerusalem, it's not on a war horse, it's on a donkey, on this working person's beast. There is something humble and almost comical about it, something so earthy that we find throughout his ministry. That isn't what Peter is expecting. He's expecting a Messiah who looks like an earthly king. Up until recently, Bill Belichick was the coach of the New England Patriots, and I have a number of friends from Boston. And Belichick is sort of this famously unpleasant but successful coach. And one of my friends from Boston said of Belichick, he's a jerk, but he's our jerk. And I think in many ways that's what we expect of the messiahs of the world. That's what we expect of the kings of the world. Like I want a king who's going to be a jerk, but a jerk on our side. And Jesus says that isn't what the kingdom looks like. In the kingdom, sit down before I tell you this. We forgive 70 times 7 times. In the kingdom, sit down before I tell you this. The people who show up at the end of the day get the same wage as the people who showed up at the start. The kingdom is about healing and about meals shared with the most unexpected people. I've got some explaining to do. Get behind me. Find out. So three possible readings in our Passion play. You might have more. I'm half wondering, is there even a scenario in which these words could be spoken playfully? Is that possible? You know how you sometimes say to someone you love, "Oh, stop it, you rascal"? Is there any scenario in which Jesus says, "Oh, come on, get behind me, Satan"? I don't know, we're going too far. I'll leave you to wonder about that. I'll leave you to tell me at coffee hour how else Jesus might say these words. And because the gospel is always about you and me, in addition to asking the question, how do you want Jesus to speak to Peter? I'll leave you with this other question. In this scene, when you meet Jesus, how do you want him to speak to you?